We are joined now by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene from the great state of Georgia. And I saw you over the weekend, and I wanted to ask you, I asked you the same thing I'm going to ask you on the show here. How about Independence Day? I know you had the kangaroo court questioning that was going on, but did you ever think you were going to get grilled about the movie Independence Day and that they would play a clip from that movie as part of an attempt to disqualify you from being able to serve in Congress?
Well, let's just say no to the entire question you just asked, because number one, that was my first time ever even having to go in court, like actually being in court. I've never been in court before. And then to be on the witness stand, questioned and challenged over something that I never did, never have been charged with. No one has been charged or convicted with it. And the January 6th committee here in Washington has never even asked me one question or sent me a letter. That was shocking. But number three, I can't even tell you, when he was asking me about the movie Independence Day and trying to say that's where I got my inspiration for this horrible lie he was telling about me. I kid you not, I was so shocked. I was like, this guy is such a clown. And he's making a mockery of this court, but he's also making a complete fool of himself. And I couldn't even remember the movie. I'd seen it years ago. I don't even know when it came out, but it was insane. It was so laughable and pathetic. It was just too much.
Congresswoman, I believe they made a sequel. I'm just going to tell you, not worth seeing from what I understand. I didn't even
the
see it.
The aliens came back? You know, they came back again,
I
Buck?
think there was Independence Day, too. I think they
you might be right. I don't even remember
that. I'm just trying to save her some time. But, Congresswoman, can you tell everybody, and thanks for being with us, of course, can you tell everybody, like, what happened here? Because we talked about this. We mentioned this in the show last week. It kind of bubbled up in the news cycle. All of a sudden, you're on the stand being asked questions because someone has sued to prevent you from being able to run for re-election because of the insurrection. Like, how did this even happen? Like, can you tell us what this was all about?
Yeah, that is the question everyone's asking, and there's a lot of confusion about it. So what everyone needs to understand is there is a 501c3. It's an organization that is funded, and they're called Free Speech for People, which is the most hypocritical name because they're literally trying to silence my free speech and my district's free speech by ripping my name off the ballot and taking away my district's ability to even cast a vote for me. They're destroying free speech, and they're destroying democracy, and they are meddling in our elections. These guys are from New York and Massachusetts. They're not even from Georgia. But what they're doing is they're using a plan that Mark Elias, Hillary Clinton's nasty election attorney that concocted the whole Russian collusion idea, they're taking his plan and they are implementing it against multiple Republican members of Congress and state legislators. We're not the only ones. But in my case, because of our state laws, it has gone way too far. And so what they do, Free Speech for People, is they go and find voters. Well, let me tell you how we have over 700,000 people in my district. These guys managed to drum up five voters that they could talk into doing this lawsuit. One of the five happens to be the Democrat district chair of my district. So you can imagine how they got 5 voters in my district. They called her and said, find some friends. Well, she found 4. Congratulations to them. And they filed this challenge. Well, the group has also done this to Madison Cawthorn, Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar, Tom Tiffany, Congressman Fitzgerald. There's a whole line of Republicans the same group is targeting. So this whole thing is political. It is a complete scam. It's funded. It is literally funded by dark money groups, other 501c3s, and other foundations, and they're truly meddling in our elections. Well, that because of the laws in Georgia, and it's a candidacy qualifications challenge. Typically, that would be a challenge like, where do you live? Do you live in the state? Or how old are you? Are you old enough to run for office? But they're twisting the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and they're applying what should be only talked about in Congress because that's how it's written. Instead, they're trying to put it on the state level, which is absolutely wrong. And they're trying to say that they're claiming that I engaged in an insurrection, which I did not. It's provable. And they're saying because of that, I don't qualify to run for Congress, which is an absolute lie about me. It's slander. It's very wrong. And these guys should lose their license to practice law.
Congresswoman, I was fascinated by the procedural posture here, and this is me putting my lawyer hat on because I'm a lawyer as well. For people out there who might be confused by this entire process, they are using a part of law that was implemented to apply against former Confederate soldiers and representatives in the government of the Confederacy to try to keep you from being eligible to run. It hasn't been applied in over 100 years. Clearly was not drafted with this in mind. But for people out there to be thinking about this, we're talking about something that was designed in the 1860s to be applied to former Confederate soldiers and officials in the wake of the Civil War. That's what they're trying to use to get you out off the ballot. So what happens now? So I believe I'm correct that the primary day in Georgia is around May 24th, if I'm not mistaken. How does this play out? What's the time frame? What are your legal advisors telling you is going to happen?
Well, everybody across the board, I mean, both sides of the aisle, attorneys everywhere are saying that they're going to fail, that this is a complete farce. And just as you described, and good job, you described that very well. This is from a Civil War era amendment, and that's what it was meant for. Not at all for going after members of Congress who object. We objected, and we're allowed to do that legally and lawfully, just like the Democrats objected to the past 3 Republican elected presidents. We did nothing wrong. And the other thing to point out is I was a victim of that riot because I was in the House chamber when it happened and was shocked, scared, and tweeted out a video telling people to stop. So it's the whole thing is just unbelievable. What's going to happen next is, I was on the witness stand for, I think it was almost 4 hours, and they went through all their questioning and they presented their CNN articles and the Independence Day movie, and Mother Jones chopped up videos as their evidence. The judge and then, my attorneys, thankfully, they're so great. They did such a good job by trying to actually talk about the law and talk about, my defense and how this is so wrong. The judge will write up his ruling. Both attorneys have until tomorrow on Thursday to present their briefs, and the judge will write up his ruling, send it to our Georgia Secretary of State, who's Brad Raffensperger, and then Brad Raffensperger is the one who actually makes the decision based on the findings of the Administrative Law Court.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, everybody. Oh, one more question for you. Did they really ask you if 1776 was a violent, like a call to violence, like just mentioning 1770? What was that all about?
That is what they were accusing me of, and then which was honestly just outrageous. It is so outrageous. On our state seal, which hung on the wall behind the judge, literally in the center of the courtroom for everyone to see, is 1776, is on our state seal, the Georgia state seal. So by their accusations and their description of anyone talking about 1776, they were basically saying that entire courtroom was waging an insurrection by having, in the state of Georgia, by having 1776 on the seal. They were saying that anytime anyone talks about 1776, it's a call for an war or insurrection or violence, which is actually completely opposite of what I talk about when I talk about 1776. And people in my district, people all over America remember 1776 as we talk about our freedoms and how thankful we are and the courage that our founding fathers had with writing the Declaration of Independence. And that is what we're referring to. And the whole reason we talk about 1776 is because we never want war again. And we don't want a civil war. We don't want war. And that was the that's why we were so focused on doing a legal and lawful objection in Congress as members of Congress. We don't want the things that happened on January 6th. We don't want anything like that.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, we appreciate the time. I hope that they don't determine that you are a Confederate soldier based on the precedent that they are attempting to apply there. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Well, if that's the case, I'd say I look pretty good for a Confederate soldier.
I'd have to agree. You'd be 180 years old.
Have any.
That is Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman from North Georgia.
Our friend Lisa Boothe of Fox News is with us now. She's got a great podcast out there you can all check out, The Truth with Lisa Boothe. Lisa, thanks for hanging out with the two of us. Appreciate it.
Buck, Clay, how's it going?
We're good. So it's funny because your podcast is The Truth with Lisa Boothe. A great time to ask you about the Ministry of Truth, or at least the DHS Anti-Disinformation Overview Board or whatever. At the same time that Elon has offered to buy and has had an accepted bid for Twitter, it feels like something is shifting right now, Lisa.
Well, a weird coincidence, right? So you've got Elon Musk trying to buy Twitter with the idea of actually having a place for free speech, free conversation in the public domain, actually wanting to change the business model that Twitter has been, which is essentially just censoring conservatives like us. And then all of a sudden now the Biden administration is like, oh, let's set up this Ministry of Truth. But I could thank him because that's the whole point of my podcast. You know, I launched it last year and we're relaunching on Monday with iHeart, with Premier Networks. Everyone can find it wherever you find your podcast. But the whole point is this idea that we live in a society now where the truth really doesn't exist. And the whole point to the left is they want to control what is truth. They want to control the language that we use. And if they do so, they control society. And so we're in this really big fight right now for truth. And Democrats want to live in a world where women can be men and men can be women. Right? You've got women in women's prisons getting pregnant because they're letting men in. And yet the left wants to set up a society where you can't say basic facts. Right? So we've got to fight that. So that's really the whole point of my podcast. And then also it rhymes. You know, you've got The Truth with Lisa Boothe, so it just sounds nice. So there's that too. But it's just like getting to the bottom of this stuff and just speaking the truth and not being afraid of all this garbage, this clown world that we live in.
Lisa, what do you think about Elon Musk getting accused of being a misogynist because he called out the people who made the decision to block the Hunter Biden laptop story, and Twitter's immediate response is to say, oh, this is misogyny. How dare you call out these people? Shouldn't it be fair game to call out people on Twitter regardless of their background when they make awful decisions? And shouldn't those people have to wear the results of those awful decisions? I just don't understand how misogyny has anything to do with that choice.
Well, it's just, they want to always use these things as like a shield and a sword, right? They can accuse people of this, but then the second things get a little tough, it's like, oh, I'm the victim. Now I'm, like that's what Hillary Clinton did. That's what Kamala Harris did. Remember the debate with Mike Pence and everyone was like, oh, he was mansplit, right? It's all like garbage. Yes. And it's just an ability to sort of wield this power when they want to use it. And I'm just over it. Like, I don't play into this whole like victimhood garbage. Look, I grew up with 3 brothers. I worked in politics. I don't just suck it up, Buttercup. Like, it's annoying that we live in this world where everyone is so sensitive and it's really just being used as a political weapon. They don't really care about any of this. I hardly, it's just ridiculous.
Speaking of Lisa Boothe, her podcast is The Truth with Lisa Boothe. You also check her out on Fox News, where she frequently appears. Lisa, the Biden administration, Clay shared this clip out earlier today where Biden does have, it looks like a short circuit for a moment. He looks like he just doesn't really know where he is. And you have worked in politics and obviously a lot of political commentary. Where do you think this goes for them? They're heading into a midterm that is not going to go well. It's just a question of how poorly it goes for Democrats, I think, at this point, unless something crazy happens. And then you're going to have a president that is increasingly, obviously, not up for this. Do you think they just try to push him through for another term? What's the strategy?
Well, I think it'll be interesting where the Hunter Biden stuff goes, because I feel like if it catches some speed, it's because they're trying to nuke Joe Biden and get him out of office. So I think that'll be interesting to watch. But I mean, look, it's blatantly obvious to everyone that Joe Biden is senile, that he has lost a step, that he is not equipped to be commander in chief. And obviously, Buck, as you know, it has consequences, because who's watching that? You've got people like Putin, you've got North Korea, you've got China. All of our enemies are watching this and saying that if you want to seize, if you want to, if you're China, you want to potentially take Taiwan, now is probably your opportunity to do so, because we have a man in the office who probably should be in a retirement home, not the White House, and we're incredibly weak, and we're in a really precarious situation, a dangerous situation as a country right now. And so I really think it's imperative for Republicans to take back the House and the Senate. Now, it's important to get Republicans who will actually fight, and not, people who are just going to bend down and, kowtow to the left. But it's important. I mean, we've got a lot of these big fights ahead of us. Obviously, even as we saw with COVID, we were teetering on the edge of tyranny, and a lot of people are willing to go along with it. So it's, we're in a dangerous time as a country right now for a lot of different reasons.
Lisa, where do you think we're headed? And Buck and I obviously talk a lot about the midterms in 2022, but also looking beyond there. I watched the clip and watched Joe Biden talking earlier today, and I feel like you can see him getting worse every single month. He's not as good as he was the month before, and that certainly is going to continue. I find it hard to believe they're going to run him. It's certainly without a challenge in the 2024 race. What do you think happens with Trump? What do you think DeSantis does? How would you handicap right now 2024 as we sit here 2.5 years out from that election?
Well, obviously, the DeSantis equation, I think a lot of it depends on what Trump ultimately decides to do. I mean, I don't know. If you're him, do you want to go through this all again, considering he's probably the most investigated man in America. Like, do you want to go through all that again? I don't know. That's a question for him. If not Trump, obviously DeSantis. For Biden, I don't think he's going to run again in 2024. I think they're going to get rid of him. He's so weak. He's a liability to the left. He probably would lose, depending on, regardless who Republicans end up running in 2024. But in terms of where we're heading as like a country and just larger questions, I really do think we're at a time as a country, like, what are we, right? Like, what do we believe as Americans after going through COVID, after seeing tyranny firsthand, after seeing how many politicians want to abuse that kind of power? I mean, we are close to, some sort of Australia scenario or Canada where punishing citizens for not getting vaccinated, not getting a vaccine that they don't need. So I think we are in a really interesting and consequential time as Americans of just figuring out, like, who are we? What are our core values? And if you're the left and you hate this country, as they do, you don't believe in the Constitution, no wonder they're letting millions of people come into our country, not even defending our borders, because they want to destroy this nation. They want to change this nation. And what easier way to do that than letting millions of people in that don't share our values, don't believe in America, don't believe in our rule of law. So, we are literally in a point where it's about the survival of the country and the survival of the nation that we know, that we love, that our founding fathers founded, and that's enshrined in the Constitution. But that's where we are as a country. So it's like, it's the horse race stuff that I love and you guys love, but it's also just core values. Like, who are we? What are we as a nation?
The Truth with Lisa Boothe is the podcast. Lisa, thanks for coming to hang with us. Come back on soon.
Also, I would have used my AirPods, but I accidentally put them in the washing machine last night. And then I used my AirPod finder, and it led me to the washing machine. So good to know it works, but bad to know that I nuked my AirPods. So
the wonders of technology.
I sound okay in the interview.
All right, Lisa. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
We have Matt Walsh. But first, for those of you out there that are not familiar with this story, I want to play a clip of Amazon employees losing their minds over the success of his children's book to kind of put into context some of the questions that we're going to be asking Matt here about. Let's listen to that.
It's about a book called Johnny the Walrus. And I want to be very clear, the next two are about books. And I saw someone say, oh joy, we're going to talk about one of them because it's been a very traumatic experience for transgender Amazonians and our transgender customers. What I don't want to come out of this is slamming the books team with a bunch of tickets. They're already aware of this. There are things in the space that are happening. But Johnny the Walrus is a bit of a problematic book. Not a bit. It is not a bit of a problem. It's one hell of a problem.
Wow, that's quite an endorsement of the book, by the way. Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire with us now. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Yeah, doing great. I once we do I guess will now be our fourth printing. I want to take some of those superlatives and put them right there on the cover. One hell of a problem would be good.
Tell us about the books, Matt. Just so everyone understands, you speak from a perspective of particular knowledge because it is without question that you are a best-selling children's book author / gender expert. And so, what is Johnny the Walrus? Like, so people understand what the book is.
It is a legitimate children's book, no matter what Amazon might say about it now. It's written on cardboard. It's a board book for preschoolers, and it's about a young boy who pretends to be a walrus, and his mother is, a little bit confused and kind of progressive, and so she takes that self-identity seriously and endeavors to raise her child in his walrus self-identity, and eventually even tries to get him medically transitioned into a walrus. But the good news is, by the end, she there's some sense talked into her, and she realizes that just because her child said something and is pretending something doesn't mean it's actually true. And she learns to accept him, and he learns to accept himself for who he truly is. So it's actually, it's actually a bok of true self-acceptance, which when I was a kid, that's like every children's book had a message of self-acceptance. And now apparently that's a traumatic message to Amazon anyway.
It's so interesting here because the satire, and thanks for joining us, Matt, the satire is so perfectly delivered. I mean, you had Amazon employees basically brought to tears over the conceit of your children's book. And yet I feel, and I'm curious if you feel this, that there's suddenly, and it felt like a long time because a lot of us have been out here fighting this insanity forever, it feels like, there suddenly is a recognition that the left wing in this country has completely lost its mind. Buck and I are feeling that uprising. Do you feel it as well based on what you're doing and when you're sharing these videos where you used to be, like us, a little bit outside of the mainstream, that now everybody's like, these guys that everybody was saying were extremists are actually totally normal, and it's the other people who have lost their minds?
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I mean, this is something that, like you said, for years I've been talking about this issue. We've been talking about it, and I do feel like there's something of a cultural shift. The tide is turning a little bit. I mean, the fact that, and Johnny the Walrus it's a small thing. Of course, it's like a small salvo in the cultural battlefield, but even in a small way, the fact that the number one book in the country right now is a board book for preschoolers satirizing gender ideology. I mean, that would have been unthinkable even like up until it happened. It was kind of unthinkable that would happen. But it's a microcosm of this larger shift that's happening, and I think it has to do with a lot of different things. And one of them certainly is the fact that the left they've had victory after victory after victory of basically running unopposed in the culture, and it just kept marching forward, progressing in their own kind of way. And have they finally crossed over a line where people are saying, this is too far? I can't. There are a lot of just sort of normal people in the country willing to tolerate and accept, I think, much more than they should have tolerated and accepted. But you get to a point where it's like, this is just too much now. And when you're going after children and people can see that you're going after children, you're doing it so explicitly, trying to indoctrinate them into this insane ideology, I think that maybe was just the final straw for a lot of people.
It was also remarkable. We're speaking of Matt Walsh. He is, of course, the Matt Walsh podcast and at the Daily Wire, and author of the book Johnny the Walrus, which we're talking to you about, which caused obvious consternation inside of Amazon. We heard just a few moments ago, Clay had that sound for everybody of some Amazon executive, probably on conversational health or whatever, talking about how upsetting it is, very problematic, a hell of a problematic book that Matt has. But beyond that, Matt, as everyone listening should know, they had an enraged customer leave a voicemail about your book that they then played in this Amazon meeting. This has all since come out. It's all been leaked. Here is the enraged customer, and I wanted to have you respond to her complaint about your book.
You are selling a manual to how to teach kids to bully other kids to commit suicide. She said she was going to get the book stripped off of your site. Now he is bragging that he has the #1 book. You are still going to continue to sell it. And now he's bragging and that he's glad it's going to make the LGBTQIA kids, especially transgenders, commit suicide. He's bragging about it on Twitter.
What do you say, Matt?
Well, I was certainly bragging about the book and have continued to brag about it. I obviously have not been bragging about it causing anyone to commit suicide because, of course, it actually will not cause that at all. And she has basically come up with her own kind of dark, gritty reimagining reboot of my book. She's included a lot of plot details that are just not in it at all. In fact, the funny thing here is that the book doesn't mention transgenderism at all, and it certainly doesn't call for anyone to be bullied or anything like that. She's just inventing things in the book that simply aren't there. Nothing even close to it's there. And like you pointed out, it's one thing if just some kooky woman comes up with that, but Amazon's playing this in their meeting. They're endorsing it. I mean, they say in the leaked audio that like this, she does a good job of summarizing the book or whatever. So they are endorsing her version of it, which is a total fantasy. But this is what you get on the left. That I mean, what she's describing is not the book at all. But they feel, as the offended people, they feel like that's what the book is saying. And so since they feel that way, then that's actually what the book is. That's kind of the way they see it, I guess.
It also feels, Matt, like this is an extension of the speech that the left doesn't like equals violence game that they play, and because it's not just that they don't like the book; it's the book is going to cause suicide based on nothing other than just. But it feels like this is something that is often done to justify censorship, particularly on this issue. Is that it's actually violence? Like your words are violence.
Yeah, absolutely. And the suicide thing in particular, I mean, we can you listen to that and you kind of laugh at the woman because it's so absurd, but at the same time, there's something really dark and insidious here. First of all, just using suicide as a cudgel in this way is really gross, but we get so used to it because it's what you always get on the left, and especially when it comes to this issue, because the real serious thing is, like, they can say whatever they want about my book, but the thing is that line about, oh, you're causing suicide, this is what parents hear when their 12-year-old girl comes home from school saying, I think I'm a boy, and then they go to a counselor, and the counselor will tell the parents, oh, well, you have to go along with the transition or she'll kill herself. This is the kind of emotional blackmail that's being used to very serious effect to cause this, 10 times, like 10x jump in trans identification among the youth. And a lot of it is through exactly the kind of thing we just heard, this emotional blackmail.
Do you think, Matt, in your experience, that one thing the left wing has not yet recognized because they're so wrapped up in their own insanity is how much of losers they are? And I mean that in the context of comedy for so long. If you went back in time and you were talking about Howard Stern, for instance, before he lost his mind, that call would be the kind of call that he would play on his radio show to make fun of that woman for being a histrionic loser. If you look at what happened with the Dave Chappelle protest, I'm sure you saw those videos, which were so phenomenal, where the guys counter-protested and they were walking around saying, like, hey, we like jokes, and they broke his sign and, like, accused him of trying to use it as a weapon. I think what's puncturing the left right now is they don't even realize how ridiculous they are or what total losers they are. They have adopted such an incredibly ridiculous position, and they're so unable to self-satire now because that would be the words of violence that Buck was referencing. This is one of the most fertile comedic terrains I can ever remember, and there's still very few people trotting it. Do you feel that way when you're kind of on social media on a day-to-day basis, or you see, I can only imagine how much you were cackling when you saw this video. It had to be like the greatest thing that could have ever happened.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is the pinnacle of my career, I think. I don't know if it's going to get better than that, but I totally agree with you. This is something I was talking about this morning that, there's talk about the cultural shift that's happening. Part of it is, and this is an underrated part of it, but really significant part, is that the right now is way funnier than the left and is having a lot more fun, I think, way better at kind of mockery, satire, trolling, all this kind of stuff I think on the right, there's a much better source of that. And that has not always been the case. I mean, for the longest time, it was the other way around.
Yeah.
But I can't remember the last time that someone on the left did like anything funny at all. And it used to be completely reversed. But and part of that is that there's so much low hanging fruit here. You can't help it. It's just they make it so easy to make fun of. And also, of course, on the left, their ideology just forbids them from laughing about almost anything anymore. And I think that's certainly hurting them as well.
Matt, before we let you go, I'm just wondering, you have gone around the country. I think you have a documentary about it where you ask a lot of activists, left-wingers, what is a woman? Has any of the trans activists or the left-wing apparatus folks, have any of them come forward to actually take up your challenge of a definition of what is a woman?
No, and we do have the documentary. It's going to come out in a few weeks, and we'll have a lot more information about that in the next week or two. But yeah, we did. I went all around the country and even across the world to the far reaches in some cases, and I did not find a single person on the left, not one single person. And I talked to some of the so-called experts too, some world-leading experts, and none of them were able to simply define the word woman or even talk coherently about it. And it is pretty incredible, but that'll all be in the film.
Can folks by the way, can folks still buy Johnny the Walrus on Amazon?
As of right now, it's number one on Amazon until I just poke the bear too much and they get so sick of it they have to take it down. For right now, it's still there and you can go buy it.
All right.
How many copies of this book, by the way, have you guys sold of Johnny the Walrus? Do you even know?
I don't know exactly, but it's been tens of thousands of copies. It's so many copies we've sold of this book. And it's
what did you think that you might sell when you wrote this children's book? I mean, you've sold tens of thousands. Has this wildly exceeded your expectations for what would happen?
It has. I mean, I knew that the market was there, and so I thought that it would be successful. But it has far outstripped my expectations for sure. But also, it's been a big assist from the left and from Amazon and some of the stuff that I just couldn't have anticipated. That's obviously helped us quite a bit in selling the book.
The book is Johnny the Walrus. The author is Matt Walsh. Matt, always appreciate you coming by. Thanks, man.
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
We are joined now by Dr. Marty Makary. He has been one of the true stalwarts for truth in what has been a crazy, insane COVID era. And so, first of all, thank you. You're also advising Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia. You're at Johns Hopkins. And Doctor, right off the top here, there's been a lot of discussion about suddenly an emergency authorization for young kids to be getting COVID shots. What is your analysis now that we know, according to the CDC, that there's at least 75% of kids with antibodies, meaning they've recovered from COVID, with the idea of getting kids boosters, with the idea of young kids getting the COVID shots?
Well, good to be with you. I would say for parents who are wondering what to do about vaccinating young kids under 5 years of age, 75% of kids have had COVID, like you said. There's zero data that if you've had COVID, you'll benefit from a vaccine at a young age. So there's a small group of people who are not immune, who have a significant medical condition, maybe leukemia, maybe they've got a glucose disorder. Those are the kids who could benefit. But by the time we get it, I'm not sure it's going to be relevant. We're going to have the authorization as early as June. You know, there's a reason why these companies haven't applied up until this time. It barely works. And the efficacy is in the 30s in kids under 5. So we need to just calm down. My fear is as soon as we get the authorization, it's going to be mandated for school.
Doc, can I follow up on that? Because I'm very, very curious about why it is that now that we have even more data about the vaccines, more than ever before, just because of the passage of time, the numbers are getting higher, more people have gotten the shots, more people have gotten sick. We should have a really good sense of any question we could ask about these vaccines should be more answerable now than ever before. On the stoppage of spread, we know it didn't stop the spread as a categorical statement. Do we have any sense as to how much the vaccines were even able to prevent transmission of COVID, of the Omicron wave? Do we have numbers? Do we know? Will we ever know?
Look, if we're going to be honest, it really doesn't do that. Plus, this is a vaccine designed for a variant 5 variants ago for the original Wuhan strain. So people like Biden and Fauci that got 4 doses, they got 4 doses of the same variant-based vaccine, not like a flu shot each year.
And is that true for Moderna as well, by the way, for the emergency auth? Is that essentially a vaccine geared toward the initial strain? Sorry to interrupt, Doc.
Yeah, they're just redosing it. I mean, it's a good way to make a lot of money if you want to do it quickly. If they really want to do something good, they would have tested a Omicron-specific vaccine. But we have a public health community that believes all vaccines are good. Really doesn't matter what the data shows. Any vaccine, rah, we got to push it. The reality is if you're going to recommend a vaccine to healthy kids, you need 2 numbers that we don't have. How many healthy kids have died of COVID? No one knows. The CDC director doesn't know, so I doubt anyone else has that number. And the other is, what is the true incidence of vaccine-related complications? No one is honest about that because we do a pretty poor job collecting it. Most of our learnings are coming from overseas.
Dr. Makary, again, I just want to dive into one of the things you just said. You said you're concerned that a lot of schools might be mandating the COVID shot with the authorizations now getting to younger and younger kids and emergency use and all those things. What would you say to parents out there about the idea of COVID shot mandates? How would you treat that if you had your own kids? And I don't know if how old your kids are at this point, but I've got, for instance, a 14, an 11, and a 7-year-old. My kids are not getting the COVID shot. I think they've probably already had COVID because my wife and I have both had it. This is a real fear, I think, for a lot of our listeners that shot might be mandated as a part of returning to school in the fall. How realistic do you think those mandates might be? And what would you say to parents who are opposed to that idea?
Well, we're in a low point right now, and the politicians are eager to show that they are, for independent choice and liberty and living with this. But we're going to have an election, and after that election, we're going to see an increase in cases for sure. I don't think we're going to see hospitalizations bump, but as long as we're mass testing everybody, you're going to see cases bump up because this is a seasonal virus like flu and RSV and every other seasonal virus. And all of these issues are going to reignite. It's going to be another massive battle around the exact same issues because we've not studied the interventions that have been done. We've never studied cloth masks and school closures. So it's everyone's opinion right now, and you're going to see all these issues reignite. For the schools that want to do mandates for vaccines, I would ask them, how many healthy kids have died of COVID? No one knows. And what are the vaccine-related complications? No one knows. I don't know how you can mandate something without knowing those numbers.
Dr. Makary, it's just at some level, because things are getting better right now, Fauci yesterday or whatever it was said the pandemic is over, and now it's not over. We're just in a new phase of the pandemic. But they're recognizing the politics have shifted here. It's more about politics than it is actually about the science with the people that are making a lot of these determinations. Do you think we're ever going to get an honest accounting of what has really gone on here? And I mean, specifically, what would it take for the medical community to finally say, you know what kind of study do we have to do so that we never have to wear those stupid cloth masks ever again? I mean, I know that in Spain, I think it was 4-year-olds, or it might have been 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, one age group did mask, the other did not mask. Not only was there no difference, I saw this study in one group being safer, the curves were exactly the same. The load goes up with one group, the caseload was going up with the other. It went down at the same time as well because it made absolutely no difference. What would we have to do? How could we design a study so that Fauci would finally have to say, okay, yeah, cloth masks are a complete waste of time?
The study came out of Finland showing absolutely no difference in the schools with cloth mask mandates versus optional masks. I wish the New York Times or the Washington Post or any one of these outlets that have been dangling fear in children and scaring the crap out of parents would send one reporter to Europe where the schools have been open, free, and clear without masks almost the entire pandemic. What we have is a medical establishment that does not want the answer to rigorous study of these interventions. They could have studied cloth masks in 1 week when the pandemic hit us 2 weeks ago. They chose not to. They let this debate rage for 2 years until we found out from studies overseas, and the study by Tracy Hogue in California. They don't study natural immunity. They won't study. They didn't study surface transmission for months. You could have done that experiment in 1 day, So they had every American pouring gallons of alcohol-based solutions on their mail-in bags from the grocery store. Why not just do the science instead of going on all the media outlets and hypothesizing and opining and throwing out there your opinions? This is a complete failure of science.
That's well said, a complete failure of science. It's frustrating the science failed. But what you said also is a further failure, which is the media is supposed to exist to speak truth to power and hold those in power accountable. You just mentioned something. New York Times, Washington Post, they basically won't let their readers know that kids have almost no danger from COVID. Why do you think that still is 2 years into this mess?
Well, I think they're supporting the narrative that's been put out there by the Faucis and establishment. Here's the question for the media. Hey, CDC, Dr. Fauci, where are the statistics on suicide in 2021? We always get those statistics in a timely fashion from CDC's Office of Vital Statistics. Why aren't you reporting them? Why don't you send a reporter to Europe and look at the schools there? Why did we implement martial law on young people when we don't have a documented case of a healthy young person dying still? So this has been the failure, and you're getting a glimpse into the risk intolerance of Dr. Fauci. He won't even go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He's got 4 doses of the vaccine in the system. He doesn't have any risk factors beyond age, and he doesn't feel comfortable going with a high-quality mask to a dinner. This is the guy who's been running our policy for 2 years. People are getting a sense as to what's going on behind the scenes.
What do you want to say,
Thank you,
Doc,
man.
to everyone listening across the country? You know, are we going to be able to live normal lives going forward, do you think, or is this going to continue to be a fight?
Well, we got to be open to a more dangerous variant. It's unlikely, but we have to be honest and open to it. The current public health officials have zero credibility. They should step aside for the sake of public health. And look, for me personally, once I got immunized, I lived a normal life, and I think that's good prescribing. We can't close swimming pools in perpetuity, as some people want to do, because somebody could die from a swimming accident. We've got to learn to live with this and respect individual choices.
Fantastic stuff as always, and thank you for all the work you have done being willing to speak out when it was not popular to speak out about many of these COVID restrictions and policies that were put in place. Thanks, Doctor.
Thanks so much, guys.
That is Dr. Marty Makary. Encourage you to go follow him on Twitter.
We got our friend Alex Berenson joining us now, author of the fantastic book Pandemia. Buy it. It'll upset the Amazon libs. Buy it. And also subscribe to his Substack, Unreported Truths. Alex, thanks for joining us, man. We got a couple things to talk to you about today.
Yeah. Good to talk to you, Buck.
And you're not calling us from inside of a Chinook helicopter with 3 screaming children in the background, which I also very much appreciate. So thank you for that. So tell me this, man. Do you want to start with Twitter stuff for a second here? Because we talk a lot about COVID stuff. Let's start with the Twitter. You have a lawsuit against Twitter. You are one of the people who famously was booted for a tweet that now, in particular, was correct. I mean, it was correct then, but now everybody knows was correct. So you'd think that you'd be one of the first ones to be brought back on, but you're actually suing them. So bring us up to speed with Berenson v. Twitter, but also what you think of Elon's purchase here.
Sure. So Berenson v. Twitter is my effort to say that I've been damaged by being banned from the platform. I should be back on the platform, and I have other damages too. Typically, these lawsuits have not gone very far because there's this provision in federal law called Section 230 that gives the companies a lot of power about their decisions about who they can allow on the platform. And my case, I believe, is considerably stronger than most other cases for a couple of reasons. One is that, and this is all in the lawsuit. One is that a Twitter executive repeatedly, contacted me, and I was in contact with him, and we discussed what I was doing. And so I was operating and tweeting, with the knowledge of Twitter, and they never really objected to anything that I did until July of 2021, when they came under tremendous pressure from the federal government. and the rest of the media about my tweets and about some comments I'd made about the vaccines, which, as you say, have mostly been borne out, if not entirely. So that's one reason, and another reason. So I have facts that other people don't have, and I also have a really good lawyer who has pointed to some provisions in California law and the California Constitution, and California, of course, is where Twitter is based. The California Constitution is very free speech protective, and California law has a number of decisions. And what people on the left love to say is Twitter's a private company, and private companies can do whatever they want on speech. When it comes to censoring speech, suddenly the left loves the fact that private companies, it's private property, and they should be allowed to treat it however they like. Which is fascinating, right? There should be no government regulation when it comes to this issue. But actually, the California Constitution and California law say explicitly, and there's a number of California court decisions on this, that large private companies can be viewed as quasi-public and can be subject to, essentially allowing people to speak, even if it's in ways that the owners might not like. And again, Twitter's in California. So Twitter can say, well, because of Section 230, this California law shouldn't apply to us. And that creates a whole, very interesting set of questions around the First Amendment and around, federal versus state law. So we have legal questions that have not been answered before. We have we have novel legal arguments, but we at the core also have this argument of fairness about what Twitter promised me, and whether or not those promises rise to the level of a contractual obligation, and whether or not when they struck me, they had any they were following their own rules, their own explicit rules. And I am happy to tell you that yesterday at the hearing in so this is being heard in a federal lawsuit in California, in the Northern District of California, which is San Francisco, before a judge named William Alsop. And he heard the case for the first time yesterday. And I'm happy to tell you, he seemed to at least ask all the right questions about this. Now, I don't know how he's going to rule. He'll rule how he rules, and hopefully we'll find that out soon. But he didn't throw it out from the bench, which I think a lot of people, certainly Twitter would have hoped that he would do that he would just say, hey, this case is dismissed, it can't go forward. And he asked Twitter's lawyers a lot of pointed questions, and this is not just me saying this. There's an article that Politico wrote, and Politico is a fairly liberal media outlet, where they pointed out that he said to Twitter yesterday, hey, let's get some discovery on this. Let's get some depositions, meaning your executives maybe should be questioned under oath about how it is that you decided to throw this guy off. And maybe we should see whether there's any communications between you and the federal government, you and other social media companies, you and pharma companies. Let's get into what's going on here. Now, again, he hasn't ruled yet, and he could still throw this out in a ruling, but that didn't feel like the tenor of the hearing to me yesterday.
Speaking to Alex Berenson, author of Pandemia, check out his Substack, Unreported Truths. Alex, you worked at the New York Times years ago, and so you understand that world and the alleged ethos that journalists are supposed to be operating under in a variety of contexts. What's it like for you to see pretty much the most hallowed liberal newspaper and cable news channels, for whatever that's worth, effectively say, yeah, we don't agree with free speech?
It's so disheartening, Buck. It is so upsetting to me. They basically, over the last couple of years, have run away from free speech. And I'm pretty much a free speech absolutist. Okay, I believe the answer to bad speech is more speech. The answer to good speech is more speech. Speech and the right to debate is a fundamental precept of democracy. And people say, oh, it's so complicated to regulate speech online. I think that's nonsense. Okay, I think it's actually quite simple. Look, free speech doesn't extend to infinity. If you and I, have a conspiracy to commit murder, we can't say, oh, well, we were just talking. That doesn't mean anything. If I have, child pornography in my, that I'm getting through the mail, like that's illegal. Okay, and by the way, even it's something as simple as like if you're in a public park, I can't stand in your face screaming for 4 hours straight, right? At some point, I'm harassing you. It rises to the level of harassment. So these they're very, very broad limits on free speech don't mean no limits on free speech, but we are able to make this distinction offline, and we can very easily make it online. And this notion that Twitter is going to be a cesspool of porn and people yelling at each other.
It already is.
Exactly right. The left uses this as an excuse to ban people like me.
I was going to say that their censorship itch, if you will, is about COVID restrictions, election stuff, transgender issues, diversity and inclusion, and policing and race, and that's where they actually have a problem with. That's where they want to shut everybody down. It's not on these other things.
That's right. They don't care that there's porn on Twitter. I mean, and by the way, and so to go back to Berenson v. Twitter, the reason this is so important, and the judge actually asked yesterday, he said to Twitter, look, if and he said, you're going to have a new owner, and he may feel differently about this lawsuit. Why should I continue to hear it? And Twitter said, and I think in this case they're correct. They said, look, we may have a new owner. That deal may go through, but it hasn't gone through yet. And for the time being, this is our position. And, from my point of view, Twitter, I'm not allowed on Twitter right now. Whatever Elon may or may not do in a few months, I'm not allowed on there now. So this lawsuit should continue. That's probably the only thing Twitter and I agree on about this. But whether or not Elon takes over, my right to speak on this incredibly powerful platform that has hundreds of millions of people on it, that is my best outlet to petition the government. It really is, as a journalist, Twitter is, should not be dependent on the whims of Elon Musk. Okay, because let me tell you, if Elon owns this thing and I get back on there, the first thing I'm going to start doing, maybe not the first, but maybe the first, is writing negative stuff about China. Okay, just to try to prove to Elon Musk that I want to see that you're serious about this. Okay, and because China has a lot to answer for, let's be honest. But like, we shouldn't be dependent on Elon Musk. These are rights that that are in the California Constitution, that are in the U.S. Constitution about free speech, and that's where our rights should come from. It shouldn't come from the whims of a billionaire, even if those whims I agree with.
Alex, we've only got about a minute or two here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. Clay and I discussed this a little bit yesterday. Moderna wanting an emergency authorization for is it 5 and under vaccination? Yeah. And this comes at a time when you've probably seen on social media there are some of these people purporting to be parents. I mean, I can't verify this, who essentially say they haven't let their children out of the house to see other kids and do anything in 2 years.
Right. Well, I mean, those parents now need to be, beaten about the face and neck. What can I mean, it's not a joke anymore. Like, this is not child abuse and should be treated that way. As for Moderna, there's that famous old cartoon, how about never? Does never work for you? That's how I feel about, these vaccines for kids. I mean, the risk benefit, it is insane. Anybody who's had a child who's gotten Omicron knows. I mean, again, there's this tiny fraction of kids who have severe comorbidities going in and can get really sick. But
do we have one example, Alex, that is confirmed of a healthy child in that age range without a severe, immunocompromised situation, which would mean they're susceptible to a whole lot of other viruses and things too, who has died from Omicron? Do we know of a single one?
The short answer to that question is no. I mean, I believe in Britain they said they had a handful, but they don't disclose obesity status. So I mean, even these kids who are not like, again, either immunocompromised or late stage cancer, or a lot of the kids who've gotten really sick are, they are off the charts on BMI. Again, for healthy kids, look, even if they can find a case, like one case, the fact is for healthy kids, this is barely even a cold. They should not be vaccinated against COVID with these mRNA vaccines.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to say that on Twitter soon and not just here on the show, although a lot of people listen to this show, Alex. Thank you very much for joining us. Check out Pandemia, Unreported Truths. You got another book coming out soon, too?
Well, first things first. But, Buck, have a great weekend, man.
All right. Have a great weekend, Alex. Thank you. Our friend Andy McCarthy with us now. He is at National Review, also a Fox News contributor, and spent over 20 years as an assistant U.S. attorney at the Southern District, the mighty Southern District of New York. Andy, thanks for calling in. Andy, do we have?
Buck.
Yeah, there he is. All right.
Here he is.
There he is. There's the man. It's been a while, Andy. Good to have you. So tell me this. I'll start with one of the big ones, then we can get into some of the details. Why shouldn't there be a special counsel assigned to look into Hunter Biden and possible corruption and payments to Joe Biden, whether he was vice president or whatever? I mean, well, what's the case for? What's the case against?
Well, the case against, which I've made any number of times before I was radicalized by the intolerable double standard on this, and I say that, Buck, simply because we all know that if Biden were a Republican, there would have been a special counsel like 3 years ago, right? But the good reason not to have one is that the institution is a pernicious institution. That is the institution of the special counsel. It doesn't function like an ordinary prosecutor. It targets one target. Most prosecutors, if they don't have time to make a case, they close the file and move on to the next case. Special counsels notoriously, spend too much money and too much time, and they generate a lot of process crimes. Those are crimes that are caused by the investigation instead of the crime the investigation is meant for. So there's a lot of downsides to it, and to the extent that people delude themselves into thinking that special counsels are independent, they're not. They report to the Justice Department because in our system, ultimately prosecution is a executive responsibility. So they have to report, in order to be constitutional, they have to report to the Attorney General and ultimately the President. So those are the downsides. The upsides are there's a regulation that the Justice Department is bound by, and you can say it's a good regulation or a bad regulation. The fact is it's a regulation, and they're supposed to follow it. And it says that any time the Department of Justice has a conflict of interest in a case where it is in the public interest to have an investigation, you're supposed to have a special counsel. And we're dealing with a situation in which the Biden Justice Department is investigating the Bidens. And I think one of the real downsides here is people should stop referring to this as the Hunter Biden investigation. Hunter Biden and his taxes are the least significant element of this investigation. And we already know that a number of the Bidens are involved in it. That's not saying that a number of the Bidens are guilty of felonies. I haven't said that. But their conduct is obviously part of what's being investigated here. If the public reporting is accurate, that what the Justice Department is looking into are these streams of payments from foreign sources, including regimes that are hostile to the United States, millions and millions of dollars that went into the Biden family coffers.
Andy, what about this investigation? Because I think we can both assume safely that the Biden DOJ is not going to assign a special prosecutor to look at Joe Biden's possible felony activity with regard to his son or any of that, right? I think is it safe to say you think there's no chance of that?
Well, I think there's very little chance of it unless there's a significant change in the political climate, including if the Democrats decide that Biden's a lost cause and he's not a hill worth dying on something like this. But I agree with you, Buck. The chances of them appointing one when they haven't up until now, and when their storyline is that the U.S. attorney in Delaware, and by the way, I have no reason to question that the U.S. attorney in Delaware seems like a fine guy. Everyone I've talked to tells me he's a straight arrow. He's much more like Durham than Mueller, I'm told. So this is not an indictment of him. And the other thing is, I don't mean to go on about this, Buck, but
it's all right. My next question was about that guy and what's happening there, but keep going. So
yeah, well, what I was going to say is that Garland, in his Senate testimony the other day, got very indignant, as if you don't trust me to do the right thing here. How dare you? And as you and I know from law enforcement, we don't rely in our system on the integrity of officials for investigations to function properly. We hope we get officials with integrity, but we enact regulations and rules in order to take that out of the hands of the people who are making decisions. And the thing is not whether we trust Garland or not. And there's, look, I think the Justice Department has been politicized enough under Biden that there's a lot of good reasons not to trust him. But, I'm willing to say that, that Garland's a reasonably honest guy. The point is we have a regulation because the Justice Department is supposed to strive for a standard of avoiding the appearance of impropriety. So it doesn't matter whether we trust Garland or not. What matters is there's a regulation. Are they following it? And when Garland says there isn't going to be political interference, my answer to that is there's already political interference because there's a clear regulation and he's not following it. And the only reason he's not following it is politics.
Yeah. Speaking of Andy McCarthy, everybody, nationalreview.com for his latest. Andy, do you think on this investigation that's specifically at Hunter Biden that if they really have multiple felonies that are provable and that the evidence is beyond a reasonable doubt that there's a problem here, do you think that there's a future in which they would bring charges against the sitting president's son, given just all the factors at play?
Yes, and here's why, Buck. And this is actually a cynical answer, even though I want to make sure I let everybody down easy before I start, right? Here's the interesting thing. The most interesting thing about the Biden investigation is the streams of money from, foreigners and people who are connected to these corrupt and hostile and anti-American regimes, and the millions of dollars that go into the Bidens. So they're looking at this as money laundering. They're looking at it as, did they violate the legal obligation to register as a foreign agent if you're doing business for foreign persons and entities and regimes and all that stuff. That's the interesting stuff. But what I would caution people is they keep saying that this is an investigation into Hunter Biden's taxes. And just to give a little inside baseball here, in almost every kind of investigation in the United States, the district United States attorney runs the investigation with very little interference from Main Justice, which is the Justice Department in Washington. A big exception to that is tax investigations. Tax investigations are run by tax division at Main Justice, regardless of whether the U.S. attorney is investigating other crimes that tax division doesn't have authority over, because you have to get approval from Main Justice Tax Division to bring charges. So I think that no matter what we think of Weiss in Delaware, the U.S. attorney, we ought to bear in mind the fact that there's an unusual amount of Main Justice supervision over this, number one. And number two, I could easily see a situation, because no one in America cares about tax evasion. Everybody has known, who cares about informing himself, that Hunter Biden has tax problems. They go back. He had liens on properties in the 2017, 18, 19, whenever they started. But this has been well known for a long time, and it's been reported that he's paid some back taxes because I think his counsel have advised him that the best way to try to avoid being prosecuted, or if you are prosecuted, to get a light sentence, is to make sure you pay your back taxes back. I could easily see a situation where they drag this out. Tax investigations are notoriously slow, and ultimately they take a guilty plea from him on a year or two of tax evasion, and they sew it up without doing any of the money laundering, without doing any of the foreign agency registration, and without getting into the Biden family implications of it. And this way, the Justice Department can say, see, we prosecuted the president's son. Biden, the president, can say, see, I didn't interfere. And in the end, they'll be able to say there was a prosecution, but it won't really be about anything that anybody thinks is particularly important here.
You think if that happens, Andy, you just get the president commuting the sentence of his son on the tax charge? Does he pardon? How would you see that playing out?
I think Hunter's not going to get a big sentence for tax evasion, Buck, under circumstances where he's paid the back taxes. I mean, the money items here in terms of prosecution are money laundering. That's where the real penalties are. I think, he's going to go before the court, and they're going to clean him up, and he's going to say, I was
So you think maybe he does a couple of weeks at like Club Fed or like a halfway house or whatever. The Biden administration says, yeah, look at us. We're so honorable. And then all the big stuff just fades away.
I do. I think there's a very real possibility of that. And I'm not so sure, Buck, that even if there were a special prosecutor, that doesn't happen. Because, again, to say what I said at the beginning, if we're going to treat everybody equally, there should be a special prosecutor here because they always have one in a Republican situation. But let's remember, special counsels answer to the Attorney General and ultimately to the President, and they have to follow Justice Department rules, which would mean they presumably have to follow tax division guidance. So special counsel's hardly a perfect solution here either.
Andy, just before we let you go, I'm wondering, do you hold out that there's any real possibility of big stuff coming in the Durham investigation, or has it just dragged on so long so far that it's going to go out with a whimper and not a bang? Where do you think that's likely to fall?
Buck, in the last couple of weeks in the lead up to the Sussman trial, which is supposed to start in, I think, May 16th, what Durham has said is he still has a pending open investigation. He hasn't decided whether to indict a case for fraud against the United States. He has theorized that there was a fraud against the United States, which was basically driven by the Hillary Clinton campaign. But he has said he hasn't made up his mind about things like whether the information on this Alpha Bank stuff that they brought to the FBI and to the CIA, whether it was simply insufficient to predicate an investigation or whether it was actually fraudulent, that they fabricated stuff to make it look worse than it was. I don't know why he hasn't decided that up until now. It seems to me it's been a long time, but he does say he's still looking at it.
So it's not over yet, Andy. Is that fair to say? I mean, in a meaningful way, it's not over yet.
According to Durham himself, he's told the court that, they wanted immunity for this tech executive who worked with Sussman. The defense did because they want to call him as a witness. And Durham says, I'm not immunizing him. He's still subject of an investigation. We haven't decided whether to charge him yet or not.
All right, Andy, we'll have you back to talk more about it as it develops. Andy McCarthy, everybody. Andy, thanks so much.
Thank you, Buck.